Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice college football slate that starts at noon on Saturday with 14 games. There's a lot of games. All these games have 10-point spreads or more, with the exception of two, and that's the Kansas State, Missouri game, and LSU, Mississippi State game. But we do have some stackable teams here with LSU, Notre Dame, Bama, Ohio State, and Tulane. All these games have 48 to 55 point spreads or totals, exception of Bama, Western, and Ohio State, and the Wisconsin games. So overall, I think it's going to be a super high-scoring slate. There's not a whole lot of low-scoring games on this one, and it looks like we have a lot of good quarterbacks and stuff like that playing. So we have some really good opportunities to have big games, and we have some good running backs as well. And obviously, the wide receivers are very locked and loaded for this slate. So let's go ahead and get started with our quarterbacks. Can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really helps the channel a lot. Let's get in the quarterbacks here. So we'll look at Mr. Travis for Florida State. Now, he's the most expensive quarterback that I like today. He's done the ball pretty well with 6 touchdowns, 1 interception. His matchup is pretty good. It is a little bit tough, but it should be okay today. And Florida State should try to run the score up early and get ahead pretty quick. They have a pretty good spread on this game with 26 points, and so I think he's a great option on the slate, but he is expensive and somewhat hard to roster as a result. Same kind of goes with McCord for Ohio State. The big risk here is this game gets out of control, and he doesn't really throw the ball as much like he's done in the first 2 weeks. He probably would get more fantasy points if he was in the game longer on these weeks, but he is definitely capable of a big game here. If he can throw the touchdowns, then he'll definitely pay off, but he's high risk, high reward on that situation. Jalen Milroe for Alabama is a great option today, as he has some rushing upside as well, and he has thrown the ball pretty well. And Alabama should dominate this game, though they are favored to win by 33 points, which is the most on the slate. So he is high risk, high reward, but he is capable, and he's a little bit cheaper than the other two guys I've already mentioned, which gives him some upside here. Then we'll look at Daniels for LSU. Now, I really do like Daniels here, as he's thrown the ball really well so far this season. He's got two really good games, including in fantasy point range, and he has some rushing ability as well, which gives him some upside, and I like his potential here. He's also one of the better rushing quarterbacks on the slate, and that gives him a lot of utility, and he's a little bit cheaper. Then we'll look at Hartman, who is very close to being a core play for me, as he draws really good metrics. I really like him a lot. In his few games, he's thrown for 10 touchdowns so far this season and 700 yards. He's thrown the ball very well. I really like his upside and potential here, so he's somebody I really want to utilize today, especially in a nice plus matchup against a weak defense. Though, again, this game could get out of hand early, but he's been pretty solid with 25 fantasy points on average on the first 2 games this season. Then we'll look at Cook for Missouri. Now, he is high risk, high reward. He's kind of a Hail Mary play, but he does draw some good potential for a 200-yard game here, and has some touchdown potential, and he also has some potential for getting some rushing touchdowns as well. He's averaging 20 fantasy points a game. He's nice and cheap, and he's got a pretty good matchup here against Kansas State. And that game should be relatively close, so that should keep him in the game and keep him throwing. Then we'll look at Plummer for Louisville. Now, he's kind of a Hail Mary play as well. His first game was really solid. His second game, he didn't get the touchdowns, and he's throwing too many interceptions. But he does have some rushing ability and can score some touchdowns on the ground. But he is high risk, high reward on the slate. But he's nice and cheap, and definitely a play worth considering on the slate. Maybe into the running backs here. So we're going to start with Estime for Notre Dame. Now, he's the most expensive running back, but for good reason. He's got 4 touchdowns on the season already. He's run the ball very well for this team, and he's got more rushes than anybody else on the slate, with the exception of Marks at Mississippi State. He definitely has the touchdown potential, and even though he is facing a team that has had decent rushing defense, it's not going to really hold today. The only real risk here is this game gets out of hand real quick, and then he doesn't get to play a lot. Then we'll look at Allen for Wisconsin. Now, he's an interesting play today, as he's got a really solid matchup here. He hasn't run the ball as much as most of the other guys, and he's also kind of in a timeshare, but he does get a lot of passing attempt opportunities. He's had a lot of receptions in his games. He's got, I think, 13 on the season so far, so the only real risk here is that he doesn't get a ton of yards on those receptions. He's only averaging about 2.8 yards a catch, but he could get a touchdown in that zone as well. So he definitely has some utility here, but obviously, if this game gets out of hand early, which is definitely capable of doing, then he could probably be a little bit limited. But overall, Wisconsin is favored to win by 20 points, And this is one of the 3 games over 60 total points, so he's definitely got some capability to have a big game here. Then we'll look at Marks for Mississippi State. Now, he's got a tough game here against LSU's defense, but he is capable of a big game. His first 2 games were very solid with over 100 and some yards per game, and he's had 3 touchdowns. He's also second on his team in receptions, which gives him some extra bonus as well. Though he is a little bit more expensive than I'd like him to be, he's very capable of a big game, and he's one of the guys that's going to get more touches than most other teams' running backs will. Then we'll look at Benson for Florida State. Now, he's been okay so far this season. He doesn't have the yards that a lot of other running backs do, but he does have the touches and touchdown potential in this game. And this game should be something where Florida State can get up in it early, and he should have some opportunity to get some good rushing attempts here. This is one of the lower scoring games on the slate, though, so do keep that in mind, but that's why he's a little bit reduced in price. Kind of a Hail Mary option is Martinez, and kind of a contrarian option for Oregon State. Now, his team is not favored to win, so do keep that in mind here. Sorry, his team is favored to win by a lot, actually, by 24 fantasy points. So keep that in mind. But he's got some really good upside here. He's rushed the ball fairly well with 200-yard games, but he's only had 1 touchdown. He doesn't get a lot of receptions to the air, but his price is pretty cheap, and he definitely has a great matchup here for a good game. And then we'll look at Singleton for Penn State. Now, he's a high risk, high reward option here. His first 2 games have been pretty solid with 4 touchdowns, though I don't necessarily expect him to continue the touchdown trend as he is in a timeshare with another running back, but I do think he's got some capability today. So he's high risk, high reward. And I got 2 value plays, kind of Hail Mary almost. Hughes for Tulane has some interesting upside here as he's got 2 games over 2 games where he's got a total of 150 yards. He got a lot more runs in the second game, and he looks like he's separating himself to be the top running back for the team. If he can score a touchdown, then he can pay off at this price, and he's definitely capable of that against a team with a weak rushing defense, and he's definitely favored to win the game as well. And then I've got a super Hail Mary play in Bankston for Weber State. Now they are facing Utah, and this is a very high risk, high reward play, but he'll probably run the ball quite a bit, and that'll give him some opportunity. If he can get in the red zone, he can score a touchdown. But again, this is a high risk, high reward. But he's run the ball 35 times in 2 games. He's got a lot of opportunity here. This is a very tough game, especially against a tough rushing team, but a team against a tough rushing defense. But he is a Hail Mary play. If he can score a touchdown, then he would definitely pay off because he's minimum priced, literally. And then we're going to get into our wide receivers. And so I'm going to go team by team here. So Florida State is definitely a team that I like a couple guys on, but Keon Coleman is my favorite. He is priced fairly. He's had 4 touchdowns on the season, and he draws really good metrics here. I think he's priced pretty fair, and I like his upside. Then we look at U of L, and Thrash will be the top guy. He's kind of the only guy in Louisville that I really like at wide receiver, as he's had 80 yard games, and he's going to get a lot of looks in this one, especially with them being favored in this one. Then we'll look at Kansas State, and we're going to look at Brooks and Garcia and Burden. Sorry, Brooks and Garcia, excuse me. Burden's from Missouri. So Brooks is the more expensive guy. He has actually been a little bit better in the total yards, in total receptions, but he's not quite as good on the yards side of it as Garcia is. But Garcia's also got some nice upside for a touchdown as well. They both have 1 touchdown on the season so far, and they both have good opportunity here in this game. And this should be a tight game, so they're going to have a lot of opportunities. Then we look at Missouri, and Burden will be the top option, as he's been really solid with a bunch of targets in his first 2 games, and he's had almost 215 yards here. He's only had 1 touchdown, but he's definitely going to have some opportunity for that today, and he's actually underpriced. Both Kansas State and Missouri guys, both a little bit underpriced for the slate, and so I do like their potential here. Then we'll look at LSU, and Neighbors and Thomas are going to be our top guys. They are fairly expensive today. I think Thomas is probably a little bit safer because he's got more yards and catches, but Neighbors also has some utility on the slate, and so if you go with LSU players and then they're stacked, then those guys would definitely be in play here. And Mississippi State does have a one-off guy that you could utilize, and Lededrick Griffin, as he's been really solid in his first 2 games, having 116 yards and 2 touchdowns with 9 receptions, and that gives him some utility at a cheaper price that makes him viable here. Looking at Penn State here, Lambert Smith is a little bit pricey, but he's done pretty well so far this season with 2 touchdowns, and I think he's very capable of another good game here. Moving on to the Wisconsin game, I do like Pauling here. He's kind of a high risk, high reward play. As he's not going to get as many receptions as some of the other guys on the slate, but he's going to have some touchdown potential in this one, and so that gives him some utility. Then we'll look at Notre Dame. Um, I really like 3 guys here on Notre Dame. Tyree, he's only $5,000, is a great option as he's had 125 yards so far this season. And then Thomas for Notre Dame, also at $6,200, a little bit underpriced here. And then Greathouse, who's only $4,000, is just a steal at this position. Obviously, he's averaging 12 fantasy points a game, and if he can score a touchdown, he'll definitely pay off here as he's had 8 receptions on the season. So I think all 3 of those guys are definitely in play on the slate, and I really like Notre Dame as a decent option here. Then we'll look at Oregon State and Bolden. He's a little bit pricey here, but he's done well so far in his first 2 games with 10 receptions, 118 yards. I think he's a viable option here, though he does have some risk involved here. He's definitely a good play on the slate and a decent matchup. For South Carolina, this is a very high risk, high reward option. Leggett for South Carolina has had a ton of receptions so far, getting lots of yards, though he had 2 weak opponents in his first 2 games. He definitely has a tougher opponent here against Georgia, but even if he can just manage to score a touchdown at this price, then that will give him some opportunity to have a good game here. As for Bama, we have 3 guys in Burton, Bond, and Pretense who have really good opportunities to have big games here. They have some other guys too that you could look at, like their tight end Amari and a couple other guys. But overall, I think Alabama's going to be definitely a usable team, though they are a little bit more expensive than some of the other teams to stack on. Ohio State has 2 guys I really like in Harrison and Igbuka. They both have really good upside here, but they're also very expensive, and they're probably going to be hard to roster as a result, but they definitely have capabilities. Their tight ends also have some upside on this slate as well. And then for Tulane, Keys and Jackson are 2 of my favorite plays on the slate, as they're in a pretty good matchup here. This game should be pretty close and stay well. These guys have a lot of upside, and they're a little bit underpriced, which gives them some potential here. But Tulane should be able to win this game with some couple of touchdowns, 1 or 2 from each of those guys. So overall, I think the slate is pretty good. It's going to be high scoring, which is a little bit of a concern on a slate like this, where there's not a lot of differentiating individual games, considering most of the games are lopsided. So, but it is an interesting, good slate, and it definitely has a lot of potential. So if you have any comments or questions about the slate, feel free to leave them